Mel Gibson just dropped some of the most controversial statements about Hollywood that the industry has been trying to bury for decades. And I mean, when one of the biggest movie stars in history who directed films that made over $3.6 billion at the box office starts talking about how the entertainment industry tried to destroy him for speaking the truth, you know something serious is going down. From the Passion of the Christ controversy that got him blacklisted to his recent revelations about Harvey Weinstein and the dark underbelly of Hollywood, Mel Gibson has become one of the most outspoken critics of an industry that once made him a king. This isn't just some washed-up actor complaining about losing roles, bro. This is a man who had everything, lost it all for speaking his mind, and is now back to expose what really goes on behind those closed studio doors. So let's start from the beginning, because Mel Gibson's fall from grace is one of the most dramatic stories in Hollywood history. Back in 2004, Gibson directed and financed The Passion of the Christ entirely on his own after every major studio in Hollywood rejected it. And I'm talking about a complete rejection. Like 20th Century Fox literally passed on distributing the film because they thought it was too controversial and would cause problems. But Gibson believed in the project so much that he put up $30 million of his own money to make it happen. And guess what? The film went on to make $612 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing R-rated film at the time and one of the most successful independent films in history. But here's where things get dark. Even before the film was released, Gibson faced massive backlash from powerful groups in Hollywood. The Anti-Defamation League criticized the film for what they claimed was anti-Semitism, saying it would fuel hatred against Jewish people. And according to reports, a committee of 9 Jewish and Catholic scholars studied the screenplay and found it historically inaccurate and potentially dangerous. Gibson was under attack from all sides, with major media outlets running hit pieces on him and industry insiders whispering that he was done in Hollywood. One of his most revealing statements came when he told The New Yorker that he wanted to kill Frank Rich, the New York Times critic who wrote negatively about his film, saying, "I want his intestines on a stick." Which, yeah, is pretty extreme, but it shows how much pressure he was under. Despite the controversy, or maybe because of it, The Passion of the Christ became a cultural phenomenon. Churches across America organized group viewings, and millions of Christians flocked to theaters to see it. Gibson personally made $210 million from the film in 2004 alone, according to Forbes, and his net worth was estimated at $850 million. But the industry never forgave him for going against their wishes and making a film they didn't want made. As Gibson himself said in interviews, after The Passion came out, he couldn't get hired by any major studio. They shut him out completely, and this was a guy who had won 5 Oscars for Braveheart and starred in some of the biggest blockbusters of the 80s and 90s. Then came the infamous 2006 DUI arrest in Malibu that basically sealed his fate in Hollywood. During the arrest, Gibson went on an alcohol-fueled rant where he said some pretty terrible things, including that Jews are responsible for all the wars in the world. The arresting deputy reported everything, and the media had a field day with it. Gibson issued multiple apologies, admitted he had a drinking problem, and checked himself into rehab. But Hollywood wasn't having it. The blacklist became official, and suddenly, one of the biggest stars in the world was persona non grata at every major studio and agency. But here's what's interesting about the whole situation. Gibson claims that his real crime wasn't what he said during a drunken tirade, but what he represented. In interviews, he's talked about how Hollywood is controlled by powerful interests, specifically mentioning central banks and elite power structures. He told Steve Bannon in an interview that after The Passion of the Christ, the studios wouldn't hire him because they're all controlled by the central banks. And whether you believe that or not, you can't deny that the punishment seemed disproportionate when you compare it to what other people in Hollywood have gotten away with. For example, Roman Polanski, who was convicted of statutory rape of a 13-year-old girl, has continued to make films and win awards while Gibson was essentially banned from the industry for making offensive comments. That double standard is what Gibson and his supporters point to as evidence that something else was going on. And his own brother, Donald Gibson, went on record saying that he was blacklisted by association, that people in Hollywood assumed he shared his brother's views and stopped hiring him too. Donald said, "I was getting regular work before Passion of the Christ, but I think people thought Mel was an anti-Semite, so they thought I was too. I believe I was blacklisted." fast forward to 2010, and things got even worse for Gibson when audio tapes were leaked of him having explosive arguments with his ex-girlfriend Oksana Grigorieva. In the recordings, Gibson can be heard making racist remarks and threatening her, using the N-word multiple times. Grigorieva also accused him of physical abuse and got a restraining order against him. Gibson ended up pleading no contest to a misdemeanor battery charge, and the whole thing became another massive scandal that the media covered for months. At this point, most people thought Gibson's career was completely over, that there was no coming back from this level of public disgrace. But something interesting happened. Gibson slowly started working his way back into the industry, and in 2016 he directed Hacksaw Ridge, a World War II drama about a conscientious objector who became a war hero without ever firing a weapon. The film premiered at the Venice Film Festival, where Gibson received a 10-minute standing ovation, and it went on to receive 6 Oscar nominations, including Best Director for Gibson. Hacksaw Ridge made over $175 million worldwide and proved that Gibson still had the talent and the audience support to make successful films, even if Hollywood executives didn't want to admit it. And here's where Gibson's story intersects with the Harvey Weinstein scandal in a really fascinating way. In 2022, during Weinstein's Los Angeles rape trial, it was revealed that Gibson was on the witness list to testify about what he knew regarding one of Weinstein's accusers, a massage therapist known as Jane Doe No. 3. According to court documents, the woman had confided in Gibson about what Weinstein had done to her during a massage session back in 2010. Gibson mentioned casually that he was working on a film with Weinstein, and the woman immediately started palpitating with fear. When Gibson asked what was wrong, she told him that Weinstein had assaulted her, following her into the bathroom, exposing himself and asking her to look at him and tell him how big his private parts were. What makes this even more interesting is that Weinstein's defense lawyers tried to prevent Gibson from testifying by bringing up the old feud between the two men. Apparently, after The Passion of the Christ came out, Weinstein's publishing company Miramax Books put out a book called Perspectives on Passion of the Christ that criticized the film's alleged anti-Semitic overtones. This created bad blood between the two men, and Weinstein's lawyers argued that Gibson had a bias against their client. But the judge allowed Gibson to testify anyway, though ultimately the prosecutors decided not to call him to the stand for reasons they never explained publicly. When the Harvey Weinstein scandal first broke in 2017, Gibson was promoting his film Daddy's Home 2, and he made some really interesting comments about the whole situation. He told The Guardian, "Things got shaken up a little bit, and there is a lot of light being thrown into places where there were shadows, and that is kind of healthy. It's painful, but I think pain is a precursor to change." He also said in another interview, "Your heart goes out to the victims, of course, and I'm glad that they spoke up. And I think it's unfortunate that they have to relive the whole thing to heal themselves. And the rest of us are subjected to the problem, and I think we really need to look at it." Now, some people found Gibson's comments hypocritical given his own history with women, but others saw it as him acknowledging that Hollywood has serious systemic problems. And in a 1998 interview that resurfaced years later, Gibson talked about encountering producers and industry insiders who exhibited a callous and exploitative view of women, reducing them to objects of desire or victims of violence. He described the seedy underbelly of Hollywood, where powerful men felt entitled to abuse their positions, and he said it disgusted him even back then. Gibson has also made vague but provocative statements about darker practices in Hollywood involving children. In various interviews, he's hinted at the existence of what he calls an 8-armed octopus of corruption, where removing one part of the system just allows another to grow back. He suggested that there are forces in Hollywood that actively work to suppress stories about exploitation and trafficking, and that any time a major story comes out about these issues, it mysteriously disappears from the news cycle the next day. These claims align with statements made by his Passion of the Christ star Jim Caviezel, who has been even more explicit about alleging that Hollywood elites are involved in child trafficking and other heinous activities. Now, it's important to note that Gibson hasn't provided concrete evidence for these broader claims about Hollywood's dark practices, and some of what he said falls into conspiracy theory territory. But what's undeniable is that real scandals like Weinstein, Epstein, R. Kelly, and most recently Diddy have proven that powerful people in entertainment absolutely can get away with terrible crimes for decades when they have enough money and connections. So when Gibson talks about corruption in Hollywood, he's not completely making things up. There's a track record there. The question is, why did Gibson face such severe consequences for his actions, while others who did far worse things got a pass for so long? According to journalist Allison Hope Weiner, who wrote an extensive piece for Deadline Hollywood in 2014, Gibson has been in the doghouse long enough and deserves a second chance. Weiner, who initially vilified Gibson in her coverage for the New York Times and Entertainment Weekly, changed her mind after getting to know him personally over several years. She wrote that Gibson has befriended rabbis, attended Passover Seders, and donated to Jewish causes as part of making amends. He even invited the Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy who arrested him in 2006 to have coffee and apologize directly to him. But not everyone in Hollywood has forgiven him. Actors like Seth Rogen have been vocal critics, calling Gibson a Holocaust denier and refusing to work with him. Winona Ryder came forward in 2020 claiming that Gibson had made anti-Semitic and homophobic comments to her at a party years ago, including making jokes about the Holocaust. Gibson denied the allegations, but they brought all the old controversies back into the spotlight just as his career was experiencing a resurgence. Despite all the backlash and the attempts to keep him out of Hollywood, Gibson has continued to work and even thrive in recent years. He's currently set to direct the 5th Lethal Weapon film, honoring the legacy of director Richard Donner, who asked Gibson to take over before he passed away. Gibson has also been working on a sequel to The Passion of the Christ called The Passion of the Christ Resurrection, which will focus on the 3 days between the crucifixion and resurrection. If the first film's success is any indication, this sequel could be another massive hit that Hollywood doesn't want but can't ignore. And in a surprising twist, Gibson was recently named by President Donald Trump as one of 3 special ambassadors to Hollywood, along with Jon Voight and Sylvester Stallone. Trump announced that these 3 would serve as special envoys for the purpose of bringing Hollywood back to America and making it bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. Gibson told Variety that he considers it his duty as a citizen to give any help and insight he can, which suggests he's ready to use his insider knowledge to potentially reform or at least expose some of Hollywood's problems. Gibson's net worth is currently estimated at $425 million, and he's been working steadily with projects like Flight Risk, a thriller starring Mark Wahlberg that was released in January 2025. So clearly, the blacklist isn't what it used to be, and Gibson has proven that he can survive and even thrive despite the industry's attempts to destroy him. But the question remains, what price did he pay for speaking his truth? And what truths is he still holding back? In his own words, Gibson has said he's not in control of the whole situation and that there are forces bigger than any individual working behind the scenes in Hollywood. Whether that's just conspiracy thinking or legitimate insight from someone who's been at the top of the industry for decades is up for debate. But one thing is certain, Mel Gibson has lived through one of the most dramatic rises, falls, and resurrections in Hollywood history, and he's still standing. And whether you love him or hate him, you can't deny that the man has seen things that most of us will never see and is willing to talk about them even when it costs him everything. The story is far from over, and with Gibson now in a position of influence as a special ambassador to Hollywood and working on high-profile projects, we might be about to see even more revelations about what really goes on in the entertainment industry. One thing's for sure, Mel Gibson has nothing left to lose and everything to say, and Hollywood better be ready for whatever comes next.